Good evening and welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of July 13th, 2023. It is now 5 p.m. and we will call the meeting to order. To start with, we'd like to read our land acknowledgement. So Niagara Region and the town of Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattawanda-ronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Item number 3 on our agenda is to ask if anyone has any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests, and to please do so by raising your hand if you do. Seeing none, we will then move on to item number 3, which is the approval of the agenda. If I could have a mover and seconder for the approval of the agenda. Councillor Baradzi moves that, a seconder, Member Scandinavo. I will read the actual resolution then. Resolved that the July 13th, 2023 Finance Committee agenda be approved. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Item number 5 on our agenda is receipt of previous minutes, and that would be item 5.1, the Finance Committee of June 15th, 2023. Niagara Power's AGM Annual General Meeting of June 20th, 2023, and the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee of July 6th, 2023. And again, I would just like to reiterate that this is to receive the minutes. The minutes of our Finance Committee have already gone to Council and been approved by them, but the committees have, in fact, all the committees have asked that they would like to see the minutes of the previous meeting. And so they are here for receipt only. So if I could have a mover and seconder to receive these minutes. Councillor Charrois and a seconder, Councillor Baradzi. So the resolution is resolved that the following minutes be received. The Finance Committee of June 15th, 2023. Niagara Power Incorporated's Annual General Meeting of June 20th, 2023, and the Grimsby Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting of July 6th, 2023. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. That too is carried unanimously. Item number 6 on our agenda is delegations and presentations, and we have none at this time. Item number 7 are consent reports, and we also have none of those tonight. So we will move on to item 8.1, which is Finance Report 23-23, the biannual procurement report. And we'll start by asking for a mover and seconder just to get the report on the floor for us, and then we'll begin. So Councillor Charrois, Member Thompson. So that has been moved and seconded. And then I will ask our acting treasurer, Angela Safani, if she'd be so good as to walk us through it.
Thank you. This is actually a consent report for the procurements that took place between January and June of this year, is to provide council an update of what has occurred and to ensure that it is in alignment with the procurement bylaw. We have Michelle online, who is the procurement manager. I'm sure her title is longer than that, but if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Does anyone have any questions about this? Member Hutchings.
Thank you. I thought it was a very excellent report and easy read, so thank you very much. It's not really a question, it's more of a suggestion. I'm wondering on the non-competitive procurement with the 5, page 17 of 104 here. If you've listed the bylaw, the end and all the exceptions to the bylaw, I'm wondering if you can put the numbers beside those, if you know what I mean. It lists like the exception of, number 2, open competition was conducted, or number 3, procurement is for goods intended for resale. So rather than us trying to go look back and do the bylaw to this, if you just add one column and add on that list of 5 things, non-competitive procurement, just list the exceptions to that would help the reader immensely. That's all I'm suggesting. Thank you very much. It's a very well done report.
Are there any other further questions on this report? Seeing none, then we will, I will read the resolution again and ask for your vote on this. So the resolution is resolved that report from Finance 23-23, the biannual procurement report dated July 13th, 2023 be received. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is carried unanimously. Item 8.2 on our agenda, Finance Report 23-24, is our 2022 consolidated financial statements, trust fund statements, and ultimately our report from our auditor, who is also with us, James Brennan. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much.
At this point in time, I will first ask for a mover and seconder to get the report on the floor for discussion. And so could I have someone, Councillor Vardy, Councillor Charrois has seconded that. And I think we'll start by asking Angela to walk us through the financial statements, or at least the highlights. We don't want to be here till tomorrow. I realize they're quite long. We'll start with that, and then perhaps we'll move over to Mr. Brennan.
Okay, so we were actually planning on starting with Mr. Brennan first and then transitioning to the financial statement. Is
That
that
might
okay?
be shorter to do it that way, for
He was-
sure.
Mr. Brennan was going to go through the audit report and then identify any findings that he may have in the process that they went through. So we thought that
Yes,
might be an
that may
informative
be a
process,
short,
and then that
part
would-
A may be shorter that way than part B. Happy to switch it around for sure. Mr.
Terrific.
Brennan,
Thank you.
why don't we move over to you and have you continue on? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this is the second of 2 reports that we provide. We're required to report to those having governance responsibilities at least once a year, but we do a planning and strategy one, and then we do an audit results. So I'm just going to highlight a few things in the audit results. There's really not much to report, but I do want to state that the audit is substantially completed. We still have to have the draft statements approved by council. We have the management representation letter that would be signed by management. And then there's some subsequent event procedures, including getting responses from lawyers as to whether there's any outstanding claims, etc. Under the risks and results, we noted these focus areas in our audit strategy and planning document, and I'm happy to say that we've had no significant findings in any of these sections. And that includes the group audit, where we review the working papers for the auditors, KPMG for the Niagara Power Incorporated. We do note in our report any sensitive accounting estimates or disclosures, and for Grimsby, the largest one is the post-employment benefits, which is approximately $1,060,000. There are 2 smaller ones. One is the WSIB benefits, which is $162,000, and then there's a provision for uncollectible taxes of $134,000. And then we also disclose the useful lives that are being used to amortize the capital assets, as that's an estimate as well. I'm very happy to say that under the adjustments and unrecorded misstatements, there are none. There's no adjustments, no unrecorded misstatements, and no issues with the disclosure in the financial statements, with the exception of post-employment benefits. Because interest rates have changed significantly, there was some concern that the possibility that there was a change in that liability, but it would end up being offset by any unamortized gain or loss, and so there's no disclosure issue from the financial statement point of view. The only other reportable matter is under the internal controls. There are 2 internal controls that we report. One of them is now well on the way of getting remedied. That's the one regarding having formal policies and procedures. And the town is well on its way in getting those established now. The other one is typical in some of the smaller organizations that don't have formal, I'm just going to get the correct wording here. So that's to identify and assess business risks. There's a lot of organizations that don't have formal processes, and under the internal control framework, there is supposed to be a formal one, but there are other mitigating controls here that even though we have to report on it, mitigating controls which aren't in the internal control framework, they're enough to probably not make this a significant issue, but we are required to report any. And then under technical updates and highlights, there's very few that have come out since our audit planning and strategy communication. There's some changes to the public-private partnerships section, inter-entity transactions, and then under assurance, there's some revisions under the audit evidence section. And in the appendices, there our independent auditors report is there. For again this year, it's an unqualified opinion. There's no issues with the report. Basically, we're opining that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. Does anybody want to have any questions with regards to our report and the audit results?
Any questions from any of the committee members? I see, sorry, I was looking to my left, so I'll recognize Councillor Charrois first. Brian, I'll defer to Member Hutchings first and then Councillor Charrois.
Okay, just to the auditor, a couple of questions I have. One, first the numbers. When I look at the budgets, your 2022 budgets, the 2022 actual in your audit, it's a gross difference. I mean, it's you're 57 million less 37 million is $20 million. But then I look at the actuals, there's hugely difference to the budgets. Did you look at that, review that, why that's so grossly different?
I'm sure Angela is going to expand on that, but the biggest difference is the capital budgeted revenues.
Okay.
And that's always difficult when you're talking capital projects that may get deferred and so on.
Okay. So that's, did you want to speak there or speak that after, Angela? Okay. Okay. And then just the other thing as a CPA or CPA, whatever I am, I think I need to ask this question of the auditor and under the Municipal Act, under section 239 of the Municipal Act, it really doesn't allow me to go into camera. Really, I'm supposed to ask you two questions if I look at the auditing standards, which I'm going to ask you. The first is to staff, and I'm going to word them differently than I would normally word them. Does staff fully cooperate and provide any and all information during this process of the audit? Anything withheld? Okay, thank you. And secondly, are under section 239 of the Municipal Act, we can go in camera for the security property of the municipality and also identifying any individuals. Are there any issues that came across your audit that would make us go in camera that would address the security, any issues regarding security of property of the corporation or any individuals be addressed during your audit?
There's nothing we're reporting into our audit results.
Thank you.
Councillor Charrois. I'm just going to suggest if you have any questions about the statements, Angela will be going through them. If you have any questions about the audit or any of those issues, then now would be our time to ask Mr. Brennan. You'll wait? Okay. Any other member of the committee have any questions? You're not quite off the hook yet, Mr. Brennan. So I guess I've deferred to all the rest of my members and now I will take my opportunity to ask you some questions. So I'm going back to your report to us. And on the third page in the executive summary, under the status of our audit, it says we successfully executed our audit strategy in accordance with the plan presented to members of council on July 11th, 2023, which I believe was the date of the letter that you did send to the town. Unfortunately, it didn't come to council. and it did come to council as a whole until April. And so not that that matters for this audit right now, but if I could be so bold as to ask you to come to finance when you begin next year's, that would be much appreciated. I think we have a number of members on here who are familiar with public accounting and auditing and will be of great value in helping and working with our auditors on planning the audit, identifying any areas of concern we might have and so on. So I would just like you to make sure it does come to our finance committee, if you'd be so kind, going forward.
Okay.
My second question or set of questions comes under that schedule you did provide on audit risks and results, and wanted to talk about purchases and payables there. You did say you performed a search of unrecorded liabilities. And of course, at our last meeting, we had the famous legal invoice that came very late and then needed to be accrued. Are you concerned at all about how we handle payables at the end, whether we have captured all of them, given that particular issue that we just went through? And I know we're trying very hard to make sure it doesn't happen again, but did that impact the 22 audit? Do you have any concerns in that area?
No, we carried out the search for unrecorded liabilities by doing a sample of subsequent payments and invoices that came in afterwards. So I think our procedures were adequate to make sure that the cutoff was as accurate as possible.
I think one of the things probably that we should still ask you to share with the committee at today's meeting, and it was something that I had asked a number of months ago, and you were kind enough to share it with our treasurer and myself at the time, was what the dollar amount of materiality is that you were using in this audit.
I don't have it at my fingertips. I might be able to pull it up, but I'm not actually in this computer system right now to be able to access it. Does it, perhaps Angela has it? I'm not sure.
And unfortunately, I know the reply came to me in the end, and I don't have it at my fingertips neither, which is why I was asking you at the moment. Okay, we'll move on to the next question then. On that same page, you talk about.
Before you go there, so basically it's a calculation of the municipality's revenues, and we use 2%. So if you can work backwards.
Yes, yes. So even something like that legal invoice, which was just over 100,000, would not be material to
No.
the overall audit materiality. On the provision for employee benefits, it says in here you reviewed actuarial reports, methods and assumptions and so on. But I think in the financial statements, it says the last time an actuarial valuation was done was 2019. And Angela has shared with me that we're in the process of getting that out to tender and updated. Can you just, do you have any concerns in that area? The rule of thumb used to be every 3 years, so we're just a trifle off. It's not cast in cement, of course, or concrete. Do you have any concerns in this particular area?
In the report, they actually do project to 2022. The only concern we had then was the discount rate appropriate still? So we've had all our clients reach out to their actuaries to come back to say whether they thought the liability would be any higher or lower. And in most cases, it would be offset by any actuarial gain or loss.
Which you had mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Correct.
Continuing on, under the provision for contaminated sites, you know, there is an accounting policy note and so on throughout the statements, and here on this report, you talk about reviewing assumptions used by management and so on. But I understand we do have some contaminated sites, so perhaps you could just talk to us about what audit work you did in this area.
So we review what management has done to determine which properties have contaminated sites and which ones are not in active use. And so we review those working papers, and they come to their own assumptions as to whether there's any contaminated sites that need a liability set up. And their conclusion was that there were no contaminated sites that required an obligation.
And so in your review of this, why do you concur with them?
Just the policies and procedures that they're following seem to be appropriate and would capture any contaminated sites that would require an obligation.
So I think, and perhaps I will ask Angela to speak to this too. We do have contaminated sites,
But they're
Um,
active,
but they're
in
all
active use.
actively being used. Yes.
Correct.
So that's why basically we have none for purposes of disclosure. Okay.
Correct.
Just to
Next
clarify
year,
that.
next year, that will be more interesting when you have asset retirement obligations to record.
Yes, for sure. Continuing on with the page just after that on the group audit, and KPMG are the auditors of Niagara Power. And you talk here about reviewing working papers, communication and so on. Can I ask, did you send a letter out to the component auditor in the planning process and share with them materiality limits and so on and so forth?
Yes, we're required to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. I would like to just continue on under sensitive accounting estimates and disclosures, because one of our committee members was asking about this prior to the meeting, and that's the very last item on useful life estimates of tangible capital assets. And could you just share with us the type of work that you do and why you have concluded that although they are certainly significant, and we would all agree on that, why you feel the useful lives that are being used on our financial statements are appropriate?
These are very common with the other municipalities that we do, and it goes back to when PSAS was adopted. This was something that was very detailed in the research when PSAS was adopted, and when the pilot projects were done, these were similar useful lives, and these are very common throughout the municipalities that we audit.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask our other committee members. There was some questions about this before the meeting. Does anyone have any questions about this to the auditor at this point in time? Okay, thank you for that. And I am almost finished with my questions, Mr. Brennan. Thank you for, I wanted to now go to the management representation letter. And on the second page of it, and I guess I'm looking out for our management who are going to be signing this, under completeness of information, item number 5, it says the restatements made to correct material misstatements in the prior period consolidated statements have been properly recorded, approved by us, and so on. But I don't, were there any for 2021?
Good catch. Good catch. That was in last year's. It'll come out now.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Someone pointed that out to me today and I didn't see it. So the
Excellent.
letter that they are going to sign will not have that paragraph in it.
Thank you. That is good to know. I believe that really concludes all of my questions, other than under the topic at the end where you talk about the strategic plan, the changes coming going forward, and one of them is on not-for-profits in the public sector. Do you have any recommendations on anything that we should be doing in-house on these coming changes?
No, you don't have any municipal not-for-profits.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any other questions before we let Mr. Brennan go? Member Hutchings?
I just don't know if this is for the auditor or for our staff. Under page 40 of 104, they use, we're talking about Grimsby Energy Incorporated.
Yes, I will say that was a catch earlier between Angela and I, and perhaps now is a good time while we have Mr. Brennan with us. So, Mr. Brennan, on note, and I realize I don't think you actually drafted these statements, but I realize you have looked them over and reviewed them. In the accounting policy notes, that would be number 1. Item 6, so little VI, we'll say, it says Grimsby Energy Incorporated, and Grimsby Energy of course, was sold in 2019, but the accounting policy note talks about cyclical billings of energy and so on. And this entity has not been owned by the town since 2019 when it was sold. And so Angela and I were discussing whether there's even any need for that accounting policy note to be in there. Do you see any requirement to leave it in?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you for your opinion on that. Yes, for sure. Angela?
One other adjustment that was pointed out, I guess I should say through you. One other adjustment that was pointed out on a similar note, but it's on page 43 of note 4 continued, is the amounts received, and that says in NPI, it should be from. So we'll be making that amendment as well. A few tweaks that will be adjusted after these are approved.
Mr. Brennan, we do have some questions as we get into the financial statements. So it looks like our questions on the audit per se are done. But members and myself may have some remaining questions on the financial statements after Angela walks us through them. You are welcome to stay on the line, I guess, or Angela may be coming and speaking with you again tomorrow if we have any adjustments or questions. So your choice as to whether you would like to leave us at this point. Thank you very much for the presentation and the work on the audit. And I think at this point, Councillor Charrois, do you have a question?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. No, I was just actually going to make a comment. I would appreciate when we're going through the financial statement, if you could be, like, I'd prefer that you are a little bit more thorough rather than skipping over sections. So you don't have to get in super detailed, but I would like to follow along and just to learn for the first time around. Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Brennan, thank you for your presentation. It's your choice whether you wish to leave us at this point in time or just simply stay in the background and listen to some of the questions and the presentation from Angela. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I just wanted to thank Angela and her team because the audit did go very smoothly this year, and it was thanks to their assistance and cooperation. So I can stay on for now if you like, and if there happens to be a question.
You are welcome to do so. Thank you. Then we will turn this part of the meeting over to our treasurer, Angela. I'll take it away.
Thank you. Katie has a little bit of a presentation that is probably not in depth as what you're looking for. So if there's anything that we're missing, or if you want to continue to flip through the pages of this financial statement, we can continue to do that.
Can I ask, would you like us to ask you questions as you go through each page, or would you like us to wait till the end?
No, it might be better if you ask questions as you go along. If we don't have an answer at the top of mind and we are able to get that, Cam is here. Cam was the lead on the financial statements and did an awesome job getting these to you. So I just wanted to flag that, and he would be very helpful to pull that information.
Okay, we will.
So if we could just probably move to slide 3, Katie. Okay, just highlighting what the findings were. Again, unqualified audit, no adjustments, and no trivial identified misstatements. So a good news audit from a staff perspective moving forward. I think a lot of hard work went into that. So on the next slide, this is a statement of financial position, which would be page 32 of your 104 book. And we just wanted to go through some of the numbers here. When you're looking at your cash and cash equivalents, you see a difference of 33 over your 40,000. When you're looking at that, though, you also need to consider your portfolio investments, because when you're looking at them in their totality, you can see there's a shift, and between the two, we have an increase of about $12 million. And that's really driven by the surplus in the year. And one of the main drivers is we have an increase in our deferred revenue, which we'll address later on through the financial statements.
Question, Member Scandinavo.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Is there like an investment committee that helps guide decisions on the portfolio investments, or is that just done by the treasurer?
Through you, Chair, the investments are guided by the treasurer and reported to Finance Committee annually. There is an investment policy approved by council. So continuing on through, so looking at, we have taxes receivable. There's a slight change there. We did have a write-off in year. Can't really speak too much about that one, but we do have a write-off that was included in there as an allowance. User fees and charges, those are the other receivables not related to taxes. So that's a grouping that we have. Not too much of a change there. Other receivables, and then investment in GPI. Any questions on the first half of that? No? Oh, and I skipped a page there. Okay, so financial liabilities, we have, sorry, I'm just skipping through my notes here, making sure I'm getting my notes as well. So one of the big things here in our financial liabilities, payables are pretty straightforward. There's a difference of about $100,000, which is not significant. That could be one invoice for us. The due to trust fund, again, we manage the funds for trust funds. So that just, we collect the funds and we spend the funds on behalf of them. And that's just an inter account that we have with them. Deferred revenue, this is the one I mentioned earlier. There's an increase of approximately $6 million. And this is the obligatory reserve. So your DCs, your parkland dedication, the legislative restricted funds for specific purposes. So that has gone up 6.5. We've received, this also includes, sorry, I should point out, this also includes your OCIF and community benefit fund, the previously known as gas tax, that's included in there as well. So those funds have been received, but not fully utilized in the year for budgeting purposes. Okay, and then also we have employee future benefits, which James hadn't noted there. We project that out through the actuary, and then our long-term debt, which is note 5 of the financial statements, which we can flip through and go through that later in more detail. Any questions on the financial liabilities?
Member Hutchings?
Yes, through you, Chair, Madam Chair, to the treasurer, acting treasurer. In note 12, they talk about unfunded liabilities, and the 1.2 is listed, it's the employee benefit obligations, and so is the long-term debts and unfunded liabilities of 2093. Vacation pay is not, where does that listed in the financial liabilities?
Thank you, through you, Chair. That is actually under accounts payable. It's an accrued liability.
Yes.
Just follow-up question. I wonder, is the town considering, it's probably not to the treasurer, but the CEO is here, or is the town considering a policy of use it or lose it in vacation pay? Most other municipalities have done that, so you cannot carry over municipality vacation pay from year to year, and it's limited that liability, that unfunded liability.
So staff have the town has implemented a policy now where when new hires come on, they follow the use it within the year and special purposes of why you're choosing to carry that forward. We do have grandfathers employees that were done under the old method where you work the year and then you get it. So we're carrying that piece as unfunded liability, where current vacation is funded liability. So as those employees retire, that should come down.
Continue on. Any other questions before Angela continues on this particular page at least? Okay, keep going.
Okay, so lastly, then we're looking at our non-financial assets, which primarily is our capital assets. And you can see that we have a reduction of roughly, I guess it's roughly $1 million. And that's really due to, we have 5 million in net amortization and net additions of 4.2 million. So that actually resulted in a reduction in our assets valuation. It's just the timing of when those assets are being constructed and going to be coming online. Katie, if we want to switch to the next page, then we'll get onto the statement of operations.
I'll just stop you right there
Perfect.
because Councillor Vardy has a question.
I'm just sort of thinking out loud about Councillor Hutchinson's comment. How much of a liability are we carrying with those who are grandfathered, who are able to carry over vacation time? And have we has there been any discussion around maybe limiting that or phasing it out, as opposed to saying, new ones are like this and the old ones are, can continue to carry over? But how much of a liability are we carrying in unused vacation time at the end of the year? I'd like to know, because that it could be significant, because we have a lot of long-term employees, and I don't know if people are taking their vacation at during the year, but maybe it's not an issue, but maybe it's a big issue. So if you could talk to that.
Thank you, and that is a good question. We're carrying roughly just over 300,000. That's actually going down year over year. It was, I think, over probably 400,000 a couple of years ago, but now we're dropping that down. And those staff who are grandfathered in are still required to take that vacation in year. They're not allowed to continue to accumulate. They need to, what they're allocated in the current year need to be utilized. So we're just carrying that 1 year historical balance.
Okay, so they're basically taking anything that they've accrued up until they get their in-year vacation, and they can tap into the pool of unused in that year. And that's how that pool is decreasing, but they can't add to it. Okay, thank you.
Perhaps just to add to that, note 12 talks about unfunded liabilities and vacation pay. And for 2022, it's 444,000 roughly. Yes. Continue on.
So thank you. So we'll move over to the revenues and the expense, the statement of operations. I think Member Hutchins pointed out the revenues for budget compared to actual. As you can see, we budgeted 57 million versus the 41 that we actually realized. And a lot of that is due to the timing of our capital assets. If we don't actually do the work, some of those revenues are deferred revenues and are truly budgeted as revenues. So if we don't recognize them as revenues, they don't come into the actual year. So that's what's driving there. We also have government transfers. So we also have, again, we had received those. So that's a deferred revenue. And I think pretty much that's it. And the other revenue, we had 11.2 million budgeted for transfers from development charges again, but that didn't occur. So we used approximately $1 million. Any questions on the revenue side?
Member Hutchings?
It's a question slash comment slash indice. I'm not sure, Madam Chair. It's a question to staff. This is how I often think of things. So the taxation is $22.257 million at the town of Grimsby. So this is the way I would think of it, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong. But every $220,000, $25,000 up or down is 1% on levy. So if you have a $225,000 increase, that's 1%, or if you can save 225, that's 1%. Is that how you look at it, sir?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is correct. But included in this 22 million, we have a wastewater levy and we have a general tax levy. So our general tax levy in this year, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, was 15.574. So the other piece would be our wastewater levy.
So with that being said, so that break that out. So with 15.574, so every $155,000 increase or decrease is 1% on the levy. Interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions on this page? Continue on.
Thank you. So going on to the expense side of things, we had some questions on so if you're looking at your budget to actual, which I think is probably the most relevant when we're looking at general government, and I should point out that these variances were reported in our year-end report that was presented to council, I believe at the time on March 2nd, which provided these year-end results, which also then there was one amendment which Councillor DeVoli has pointed out about the additional legal invoice. So that report plus the additional invoice was our year-end results, which was presented to last Finance Committee. With that being said, the general government, we saw an over budget in our legal expenses, and we had some salary payouts that we had to take care of, which was included in that line. But overall, our wages for the organization was below budget. But for that area, some items are allocated there. Under transportation, I don't think we had much variance there. Environmental services, pretty good. And then recreation and culture, we had 115 under budget in utilities, and that budget was reduced in 2023 to address the savings that we saw there. Hopefully that continues. And then we had some under budget wages as well there. So the rest was kind of scattered throughout their services. And then planning and development, we had a 70K surplus in wages and benefits due to a director gapping and some surplus savings in projects as well that are being carried forward.
Member Hutchings?
Thank you. I think in talking to the treasurer before the meeting, just to be open to the public, I think what would have been beneficial, I understand in March there, before our term, before the members came on, there was there would have been a nice companion report which showed the explanation of the variances. We didn't receive that. So thank you very much to the treasurer explaining that before the meeting to me, some of these variances, and would have been helpful in this. But so I'm not going to ask any questions. So I'll go back and look online to see what the companion report would say, but thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to that comment, I can send the report, or at least the report number, so you can find that online.
Pardon me. I see some hands over on this side of the room. Member Scandinavo.
Sorry, I don't mean to go back to this, but the variance, if I could understand a little better, the variance in revenue primarily is coming from the development charges. So if I'm understanding this correctly, it isn't like deferred revenue that is creating this this difference. It's development charges that were never levied or were being levied in a different period. Or if I look at note 17, other revenues, the budget was 19.2, the actuals were 6.9, and that, I mean, the vast majority of that difference comes under development charges.
So typically what happens with development charges is that when we collect them, and I'll let Angela or Cam add to this, they go into a liability account.
Yeah.
And then when we spend them on the things we're allowed to spend them on, then they leave that liability account and they come into revenue on the statement of operations.
Right, so these are previously levied unspent.
That these would be development, the number on the statement of operations would be development charges previously collected and now spent.
Right, so.
Yes, and
right.
on the balance sheet or the statement of financial position, those would be development charges collected and not yet spent.
Got you, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, it's correct. It's mostly due to the fact that
Okay, excellent. Through you, Chair. So basically, this is a result of having a large capital budget with not too much spend. So we had budgeted to spend development charges through our development charge study, and the actual spend is on that note, you can see much lower. So there are projects that are in works and will probably occur in this year, but you won't see that on the statement this year.
Any follow-up question to that?
No, just presumably like Member Hutchings said, you know, a variance report, like when you see such a large variance, some descriptors on that would be helpful, but understanding that this is 22 and we're halfway done 23. So I guess as we get in the groove, we'll see some of this stuff prior to the meetings. Thank you.
Any other questions on this side of the room? No, we're all good. Okay, Member Hutchings.
One last one. It's more for the viewing public, and if I was watching this, or if I was somebody reporting this, you'd see a $5 million surplus last year and a $4.7 million surplus this year, and you're wondering every $165,000 is is a 1%. Say that works out to be almost, this year, it almost works out to be 29%. That you wouldn't, 4.7 divided by 165 is 29%. So I'm assuming the surpluses, I guess I don't have this, are going towards reserves for future liabilities or future capital or, and just, again, this is, I'm asking this question so the viewing public and the media and stuff understand that we're not just overtaxing by 29%, that these are going to other future liabilities or future reserves we need to put aside.
Yes, and through you, when we present that year-end reserve, year-end report, we also include the reserve balances and where we're projecting to allocate the reserve funds, surplus dollars.
My continuation is thank you. And I just want to say, we get in, jump in the financial statements. And for everybody who is a CEO or executive director or something, it's very difficult to get the end of the year with a surplus. I want to congratulate management and staff on getting there with a surplus and making it through the year. This is on the statement of operations. Thank you.
Angela, if I could ask, I believe there is a note, although I'm having a hard time finding it quickly, that reconciles the surplus as budgeted to the surplus as reported, correct? Sorry, I'm just quickly going through looking for it. And of course, when you're trying to do it quickly, you can't find it. Note 24. Thank you, Cam. Let's keep going. So note 24 shows that the budget was set to be break even and then shows the differences as to how we actually reconciled the budgeted, but it doesn't show the actual, of course. It just shows budgeted. Yes. Okay, continue on.
Through you, Madam Chair. So Katie, if you want to go to the next slide. I'm going to be jumping ahead now. These are a couple of the notes that were included on, if you look at your statement of financial position on page 32 of 104, it highlights commitments and contingencies, note 22 and 23. So just wanted to highlight those for you. The commitments under note 22, and maybe James had touched a little bit on these, are just what the town has committed going forward. We already are aware that West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, the town has made a commitment of 9.3 million, and that is being looked to be debt financed over the next 30 years. And the town is continually putting dollars away to fund that and build that into the budget. The other commitment is a future project cost right now based on the budget and what we've committed and started. We have 3.5 million committed through procurements for future projects. And the other one we have is property revitalization tax increment grants. We call them TIG grants. These are for properties that are being developed, and then we grant back to the developer the incremental taxes over the next 10 years. And that's really to motivate development within the town. So those are the commitments that we have within the town. And then the other one we have, which was already raised again, is note 23, which was contingencies. And at this time, the town does look for those, but regarding litigation, and there are ones identified, but nothing has been identified to say that it is material enough or ensuring that we are going to pay for it, that we are including it in our statement. So we just note that here. And so we just want to flag that for you. And then other major notes that I think is worth.
Before we leave that, any questions by any of the members on those notes? I will ask my question then. Angela and I were talking about this earlier too. So I guess at this point in time, Mr. Brennan, I'm going to ask you to participate. So under the PSAB, you know, under the handbook, basically, under contractual obligations, there's always the disclosure requirement about the extent and timing, right? And one of the questions that I raised was, we show in this note the total amount that we have pledged, but we have actually collected monies for this already. We've been collecting them through the levy for the last couple of years. And so my suggestion was, would it not be good to reference into this note how much has been collected already and that is being held in reserves? And then my second point was, because we're talking about the extent and timing, to talk about the timing of when we expect that we will have to meet this pledge. And then, of course, that there's a difference 9.3 million, we will have collected, I don't remember the exact number. I'll say 1.3, 1.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. That difference of $8 million is going to be financed through debentures. So would that be helpful to expand this note and include that sort of information in it? And I will let Angela or Cam or Mr. Brennan speak to that and to the PSAB requirements. Anyone?
I
all
can step
thinking.
in. I can step in. So from what I understand, the standard is that you have to you are required to report any significant commitments that the organization has. As far as how it's going to be funded, that would be useful to the readers of the statements, I'm sure, and there'd be no harm whatsoever to add that to the note.
I did a bit of research on this before I came and looked at our neighbor right next door, the town of Lincoln. They're in the very same position that we are, where they have a large commitment as well. They have already raised monies towards it and are holding monies in reserves. And their note talks about some of these things, doesn't specifically, as I recall, address the year they expect to meet the commitment. But I think it's just a good news story in many ways that we're supporting the hospital to $9.3 million. And sorry, Cam, I can't remember the exact number, but we have already collected, over $1 million. And I'll let you share that good news number with us.
Yeah, I think as of 2022, the amount collected in reserves is 900,000 and we're collecting approximately, I think like 250, 300 per year. So depending on when that obligation is incurred, it'll grow.
I think we do know when that obligation will occur. We think I'd have to check my notes. We think it was going to be 2025, like near the end of calendar 2025. When we had the hospital representatives here a few months ago, we specifically talked about that date. So I'd like to suggest that we expand upon this note with further information to show that we've already collected some, when we expect to meet the difference to pay that out, and how we will meet that difference by issuing a debenture. Any comments from my fellow committee members?
How far along is the town on the journey for the debenture?
Angela?
If I understand the question, you mean how far along is the town to building it into our levy? 2024 should be our final year, but that is contingent on what the interest rates do. And when we do our next calculation, if we need to look at increasing that or increase it for one more year just to get it to that level where we need it at.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. So presumably at a later meeting, we'll work through the debenture and better understand some of the commitments behind it.
Through you, Madam Chair, that would be one of the processes that we'll bring forward when we're doing the budget. Those will be discussed and the rationales behind them.
So that was commitment note number 22. Continue on.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The other note that I wanted to bring forward again was the next slide, which was the deferred revenues, the obligatory reserves, just because they are such a large amount and they do play a big role in our financial statements. We're showing a $28 million balance. Again, a significant change from over last year, about 6.5. Just wanted to highlight how that came about. You can see what we've collected in the year. On the second half there, we collected 7.8 and the buckets that we received that from. And then lower down, you can see where we utilized those amounts. So we collected 7.8 million, we utilized 1.5. So that increased our overall balance to 28 million. Just wanted to point out where those monies are coming from and how they're collected. Any questions on this?
Continue on.
And lastly, I think it would be useful to point out what the reserve and reserve fund, the reserve funds are. These are the council specific purpose reserves that are approved by council through bylaw or through budget. So these are the reserves that we used when we're distributing our surpluses as well. So we have our contingency equipment. I won't read them all to you. So, and this includes our water and wastewater reserves as well. So any questions on these reserves that we're carrying forward?
Any questions? Can you just tell us which line the hospital monies are in under here?
I believe, and Cam can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're under other.
Any questions from the committee members? Continue on.
And lastly, before we get, maybe, these are the next steps, and James already, pardon? Oh, yes, please go forward. These are the next steps that we have to go through once, if the finance committee is happy and council has no further objections, then we would go through and finalize the statements, get the letter signed, and have the council approve. But any other questions before we get to this point?
I think Cam has a question or a
Well, just
comment.
back on the previous question, it is under other.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question on the statements, and I realize you didn't bring that particular one up, and it's the one we were discussing about the OMERS note. In looking at other municipalities, and I have to tell you, I did a bit of a search, looked at the town of Lincoln, the region of Niagara, that for some reason the town of Newmarket came up, and the city of Brantford. And their particular numbers that they show in unfunded pension liabilities are different than ours. And Angela and Cam researched it in the background in the last few days. And they do, or we are pulling our numbers from a different part than those municipalities I've just given as examples. But nevertheless, so one, I think we need to decide, and so could you just comment on that, Mr. Brennan? Do you have experience? They're pulling it from other municipalities are pulling it from a different part of the OMERS disclosure, and we are pulling it from their actual financial statements, I believe, with the adjustments for fair market value built in there. Is that correct? Cam, would you like to speak to that?
I would, through you, Chair. So when I was looking at it, the differences between those other municipalities that you found is they're both from the annual report of OMERS, and they are both located in their financial statements. It's just that the numbers that they were using is what they call the smoothed loss or deficit, and we're using the fair value deficit. Now, which one we should be using, I'm not entirely certain. And I'm not even sure if there's a requirement to use one or the other. We'll just have to decide on where we're going to land.
Mr. Brennan, do you have any comments to add to that?
These are the ones that are used in all 5 municipalities that we audit, and they are as Cam said, we take those. We've always taken those numbers in the financial statements every year. We did at one time look at other municipalities, and at the ones that we found, this was going back a number of years, the ones we found, they were using the same numbers as we were. So I think it's a choice, possibly. That's about all I can add.
So I guess the key is we need to be consistent from year to year, though. That if we're going
Yes,
to
we're
use one
consistent.
method,
We are-
yes.
Yeah, we are consistent, and amongst the ones we do, this is a consistent note.
The other municipalities and everybody obviously is reporting on actuarial deficits. And these numbers are quite large, as we're all well aware. We're talking billions at this point. Other municipalities typically have a line in there that says if surpluses are not available to offset, and I'm paraphrasing, increases in contributions may be required in the future. But we have not included a line like that. Do you think that would be useful to the readers of our financial statements?
It could be. I think that if that's a note in OMERS statements, then it's something that could be added to this note.
Just something to consider, I guess. Any other questions for Angela on this part of our financial statements? If not, then we will, I will read the resolution again. It's already, we've had a mover and seconder, so the resolution is, pardon me, Member Thompson.
Sorry about that, Chair. I was listening to all the experts here, and it's very nice to hear about financial practices. It's really something. And I said I bring the practical experience. And my question was earlier to the director. I asked about useful life and life cycle costing of our equipment and our apparatus and vehicles. I know before I had left that the town had been using the fleet management through a Tatum's program, but it wasn't just enough information. And I'm wondering if there's been changes for life cycle costing for this useful life that will help the auditor also to put in his report, because there was nothing in his report, as he explained, to identify besides the town says replace equipment and vehicles at a certain time.
And do you have any comments on that?
No, I mean, the useful lives are an estimate, and the ones that, I mean, they're quite varied by category as to the lives. And as I say, in other municipalities, these are very similar. So I mean, you can change your estimates going forward if you decide that a certain life cycle is different for a particular set of assets. So if management's going through a process to review life cycles, then those estimates can be changed, those useful lives.
Angela, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Two things. We mentioned this at the last meeting. We are working on the asset management plan, and I think this is going to dovetail, like the life cycle of our useful life of our assets will dovetail into that asset management plan, which will guide updating that as well. To Member Thompson's comment as well, when it looks at when we're replacing, I think staff look at the useful life, but also then we have a mechanic that reviews the asset to ensure that it should be put up for sale. Is it going to need a rehab? Is it worth keeping it longer in service or not? So those are the processes that we go through the budget process to ensure that when we're putting in a replacement in the budget, that it's due for replacement through years and through service life.
Member Thompson, follow up?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. So from what I'm hearing, Director, is basically the asset management program is going to go underway, and we're going to absorb the life cycle costing is going to come out. I think Public Works is first, right? They get everything theirs done first, and then you move into the other services. Is that what I'm looking at here?
Well, Public Works usually goes first, especially with core assets, but now we're into our non-core assets, which would include fire and the rest, and community service and the rest of the assets, even IT and administration and the facilities, all the assets within the town that the town holds. So that's when that would be looked at. And then it would layer into, again, mentioned at the last meeting, was the reserve and reserve funds, and ensuring that we're distributing and funding the reserves appropriately to do the asset replacement. I think that's going to guide that process as well.
I think that's great. And the reason I'm bringing this up is my experience and what I've seen, that there's an ability through a life cycle costing software program that will assist in capturing that you can refurbish. Also, it's time to remove vehicles from service because you just can't find parts and find things. Thank you.
Councillor Charwa first, and then Member Hutchings.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Yeah, just a comment. When I was going through this, obviously when we were talking about the life cycle, it says vehicle, machinery and equipment, 3 to 20 years. It was a huge variance, right? So if we could even break that down as to, because obviously it's different for machines, vehicles, if we could get a little bit more specific, then we kind of know, what's next.
Thank you. And we can take that back when we're doing the next cycle of the policy.
Member Hutchings.
Just a couple of comments. I should have gone back to the procurement report. I'm out of order, but I noticed you bought chairs to the council chamber, but they were all falling down the last time I was here. So when I read that report, I wondered, hopefully Anyway, bound to the financial statements, Madam Chair. The last thing, just to prove that I've read this and front to back and the efforts of trying to be incremental improvement and perfection. Couple things on note 26, general government talks about report of dysfunctional area departments such as council, clerks, town manager. I don't think the job's been called town manager since Gary Shea's been here. So just maybe it's the CEO, just I'm being, I'm at the end now, the very last things, I'm just looking at staff. And last but not least is number 16, government transfers. On the second portion, the expense side, we list as municipal as the Niagara Region Native Center and the Niagara Community Foundation. I'm not aware of them being municipal organizations. They're both not-for-profits. And one's, I think they're both charitable organizations. So I'm not sure why they're listed on the municipal organizations where we provided a grant, the Community Foundation, the Niagara Region Native Center. On note 16, government transfers. On the revenue side, revenues continued, and then there's a line 1138. And below that, the first one, it says municipal, it says Niagara Region Native Center and Niagara Community Foundation. Just not sure why they're listed as municipal. They're both not-for-profit organizations. They're not municipal organizations. And they're transfers to them. So that's just a small thing. It's small. Just want to raise it in the effort of getting them right. Thanks.
Angela?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We'll take that back and review that.
Any other questions from the committee members before we move on to the resolution? Then I will read the resolution again. So it's resolved that report FIN 23-24, the 2022 consolidated financial statements and the trust fund statements be received. And one, that the draft 2022 consolidated financial statements and trust fund statements in Appendix A of this report be recommended for approval, and that the approved financial statements be finalized, I'm going to say with the adjustments noted today, with the auditors, and then published on the town's website and circulated to stakeholders as required. So there will be some adjustments that we've talked about today that will be made to those financial statements. I'm going to say probably too much to reiterate in this particular one. So we'll count on Angela and Cam to have made notes of that or refer back to our video afterwards. Okay, so all those in favor in approval? Thank you. That is unanimous and that is carried. Item 9 is correspondence, and we have none at this point in time. So thank you, Mr. Brennan. Truly, you are now officially released
Thank you.
from our meeting. Thank you
Have a
for
good
attending.
evening.
Good night. Moving on now to other business, item 10.1 and the terms of reference. At the last meeting, we had a number of suggested changes. We asked staff to take that back, to incorporate it into our terms of reference and to bring a report forward to us, but highlighting what those changes were as well. Does anybody, we'll start first by having a mover and seconder to receive the track change report. Councillor Vardy and Councillor Baradzi seconding that. And now we'll open it up for any comments or concerns. Thank you. Member Thompson?
Yes, through you, Chair. Doing some reading and reading over old reports and everything. I'm just going to ask a question. Are we allowed to even be discussing this as it was approved by council, the terms of reference back in April?
We will let our deputy clerk address that first.
Through you, Chair. Yes, so these have been approved by council. These have just come forward as suggestions. I know at the last meeting, everyone was bringing forward some suggestions to amend the terms of reference. These will not be brought forward now. At the end of the year, we're going to be taking a full sort of summary of everybody's across the board, not just this committee, but all committees. Any suggested changes they have in order to improve, any of the processes within their terms, at the end of the year, this year, not 12 months from now, at the end of this year, we're gonna be doing a year-end review to incorporate all of those changes. And that way, come January, we'll be able to start with a new sort of streamlined version of them all.
Comments?
Yes, through you, Chair. Thank you, Katie. I got a feeling there'll be a few comments. I'd like to hear from Member Hutchings on this because there's been several good comments made that's been picked up by these professional people in this industry. And seeing it approved by council, that's what had my concerns that we're overstepping our boundaries here. And now it's going to be held off till we look at it next year. So I'd like to hear from others. Yeah.
Member Hutchings.
I'm just wondering why the time limitation put on this, that we have to wait for another year. Why can't this committee make the changes and recommend them, not approve them, recommend them to council? Council then approves them, and that's the terms of reference we operate under. I'm not sure why we have to wait 9 months.
Oh, no.
Or you're saying January or whatever, 6 months.
Katie?
Through your chair. So we, as the clerk's department, we believe that the committee has enough within their terms of reference right now to sort of round out the rest of the year. And then come the end of the year, we can sort of incorporate more of these changes. So come December, it's just, yeah, we're just trying to make sure that we're staying consistent, what we've communicated across to all committees, that we will be taking their suggestions. And at the end of the year, we're going to be doing a review.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I guess to be honest, while I understand you would kind of like to do it as a collective, and I could see the reasoning behind that, because the Finance Committee is almost somewhat of a more technical committee, I would see no harm in it coming forward as a recommendation to council. And frankly, that would be my preference, not to wait. If we've collectively agreed on something, I don't think our suggestions in there of what's come forward so far is so radical that it's going to make us kind of throw all the terms of reference, at a whack. So personally, it would be my preference for it to move forward on its own, because in a way it is kind of unique with respect to the kind of comments that were made. And I don't see it impacting negatively on any of the others. So if you want to take that back, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other committee members' comments? Councillor Charwa.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. I'm not sure whether my notice of motion at council we'll be discussing in August.
It'll be considered.
Will be, okay, so I'm not sure if, so my notice of motion is in relations to closed sessions and how much information other committee members will get. So I'm not sure whether that will be a conflict with this or, okay, no.
Katie, go ahead.
Through the chair, I think once we sort out, because today we will just be receiving the suggestions, the track changes. Once the council debates or it gets considered at the next council meeting, at that point, we still have time to, if there is conflict, we could always come back to the committee and look at different ways to amend that. But that's just where.
Any other comments from committee members? Member Hutchings.
This is not a hill I'm going to die on. But I've never seen clerks tell the committee what to do. They've helped the chair with rulings, but I've never seen the clerks in my 34 years experience tell the committee what to do. And we can't do something. So that's my first issue. And secondly, there's some substantive things in here that are in here like we just did. There is a catch-all here that says overall financial status and well-being. I guess that's the catch-all. We just approved the external audit report. It wasn't even mentioned in the terms of reference. That's why it's added. You know, there's some substantive appointment of auditors is a major financial function that we should be doing. And they're omitted from this, and that's why we've added them. And so I've never seen usually a committee and council have the priority, and they make the recommendations to staff, not staff make the decisions, I said, in direction to staff. So I'm not gonna, if that's what the clerk wants to do, and that's how this council works and this committee works, then I will stand down on that. But I just want to make the point, I don't understand process that many times committees can make changes and then send them to council. Council says, no, we don't want them right now. They can vote on that. But I'll leave that, Madam Chair, to get on to have a discussion about what's been changed and more substantive things.
Any other comments by committee members on that? I will say that I too think that some of these changes were important ones that we needed to incorporate into the terms of reference. And I personally would like to see this go forward to council to vote on, just as Councillor Vardy also mentioned. Maybe before we do that though, were there any comments on the changes that are in here that we've been tracking? Member Hutchins.
Thank you. You good? Go ahead. Okay. So just one small, one big. Committee composition, we didn't have, again, this is substantive for council to look at, because we did that. We understood verbally that members could not be chairs, but we stood down, but now it's in here, which I think is an important thing. But just the wording on it, the chair and vice chair will be a member of council. It sounds like it might be one person, could be both. I think you might want to change the plural. The chair and vice chair will be members of council. Okay, small thing. But the other one is substantive. We go from having advisory committees reporting to the finance standing committee on the last bullet to advisory committee minutes for receipt by finance committee. That's a substantive change, just getting the minutes versus reporting to. Those are two that's a big change.
Yes, and I don't recall us actually saying that. I think, I don't recall us making that change. So I'll let Katie speak to it.
Through you, Chair. Yes. So Member Hutchings, when we received your comments, I know you asked a question there saying, just looking for more clarification. In speaking with the clerk as well, we've both decided that reporting may not have been the best word to use initially, because what that means is just the advisory committees their minutes will be coming to this committee for receipt. Reporting was not quite the best word there. So that's sort of where that changes.
I guess then a question related to that, then I would assume that change applies to every single standing
That's
committee.
one of those things where it would, sorry.
So every single committee is worded the same way this
We would have to-
originally was. So that they would all need to be changed.
That's why we want to do the full review at the end of the year, because there's going to be
Changes like
domino
that?
effects.
So
Member Hutchings.
So I just think for the other committees who didn't get my copy of what I sent in, I asked, paraphrased by GDAC and NPI and GPI, I wrote, would we want reports from these and what should they be? And it changed from reporting to minutes of. So it's not what I was really suggesting. It was really suggesting if they're reporting to this committee, what reports would we want to receive, like we're getting from staff, like an audit report and all that sort of stuff. So it's a big jump and assumption, and I actually don't support it. Just let you know is that I don't think it's just reporting to a minutes of are two greatly different things.
Any other comments? Councillor Charwa.
Through you, Chair, thank you. Again, mine is just a comment, but when we received the minutes for the last GDAC meeting, there wasn't a lot of information there, and I actually had to email the chair and the vice chair to try to get information. So I don't know if we can get a little bit more, because again, like I think at any time that we're trying to get information, the whole committee should get the information too. So There wasn't a lot to share, but I found that I had to go out of my way to actually ask the question to the chair and the vice chair and to get that information. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
Any other comments by members? Member Scandinavo.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of quick comments. So first of all, I do fully support these changes and I think they're imperative to have. I think it spells out in a lot more detail what's expected of this committee. And I would strongly recommend that we try to get this put in front of council sooner rather than later. Next couple of comments is as it relates to, this is just maybe just a minor detail. As it relates to the finance bylaws, it says, responsible for active finance bylaws, but it doesn't necessarily spell that out. Does that include like annual review or they reviewed every 3 years? Like what's the expectation of the committee and at what frequency are we required to go through those and comment on them? The next thing is that I don't see and perhaps I've maybe misunderstood something. I wasn't here for the last meeting or wasn't here for the entire last meeting, but there's a sizable investment, approximately $40 million. So I don't see an investment policy on this list. So, I think that's something that we should as a group also, have some input on. And last but not least, the investments, the Grimsby Power, the NPI, I think, again, the section of this terms of reference to me is perhaps just a little bit vague. Are we solely going to be reviewing the minutes, or is there some sort of expectation that expectation from us to have some input on these investments? Because again, they're sizable on the balance sheet, the way I see it, right? So nevertheless, I'll stop there and perhaps pass it back. Thank you.
Any other comments by members? Councillor Charwa.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to comment that I think this is all a big learning opportunity for all of us. So some of you, you have the financial background. Some of us do not as much, and we're learning. So I think we all need to just come from that perspective that we're learning and we're going to try to get some compromises. We might not get everything correct right off the bat, but we're doing the best that we can. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
I think one of the things that was interesting this week when we were talking about this being on the agenda was that staff are looking at the terms of reference, and from their perspective, they're using this as a guide so that when these topics come up, that's how they know which committee it goes to. And I appreciate that. That's a great use for the terms of reference. From the committee's perspective, though, it is also what I would say becomes our workload, our schedule of what we are actually going to do. So it has two purposes, right? From a staff perspective, what gets funneled to these committees and to which committee, and from a committee perspective, what their work is going to be about, right? And so I do feel strongly, we've had a couple drafts, even as we were going along, things fell off the table, even as council was considering it from month to month. And I personally would like to see these changes incorporated and moved to council, but that does depend on how our motion reads. So Councillor Scandinavo.
Yeah, no, for sure. To be honest with you, the way I see these terms of references, it becomes more of like a work plan for the year, right? So again, the more information we can have on this, it sort of sets out what certain times of the year, in my experience, on various boards or being on the let's call it the management sides of various boards, a nice laid out terms of reference gives what the board or what the council is looking to see in a quasi terms of reference / board schedule is quite helpful. It gives everybody an expectation as to what dates at what cycle of the year. It allows for planning, and of course, we're brand new here, as you said, so it's an opportunity for all of us to learn. And I think it's imperative just the clarity in a document actually helps set us all up for success. So,
Any other comments? So we do have a proposed resolution, but I'm thinking as and not quite what I'm hearing from the members. So might I, and we already had a mover and a seconder to receive the track changes. So I believe in terms of our rules of procedure, we need to either have a friendly amendment or something like that to the actual resolution. So the resolution as it now reads says, resolve that the track changes for the Finance Committee's terms of reference be received. But if it is your desire that they be approved and forwarded to council as approved, then we would need to change the wording of the resolution. Could we?
Are we able to say approved, or can we say recommended? Recommended for council approval.
Yes. Go ahead.
Through you, Chair, I've heard some changes here. I know the motion as it stands, the track changes here as they stand. That's what would be recommended to council for approval, but I'm hearing some changes, so these would have to be taken back as well.
Yes,
The
I
amendment.
think the change I was hearing, though, I'm going to say two changes. One where we talked about the active finance bylaws, we talked about the adding the investment policy to it. The second change, and we haven't addressed the timing of the review, but on the other hand, as long as we know this is within our mandate to do, we will figure out the timing and how often we need to. So if that sounds okay, we'll leave that part out temporarily. And then the second part that I was hearing was that the part that has been changed, advisory committee minutes for receipt, that we leave it as it was originally saying, reporting to the finance standing committee. Are those amendments acceptable to everyone? Yes, and members would become plural. Thank you. Katie's just rewriting the resolution and then I will reread it again. So the resolution as amended says, and do I need someone to make an amendment on this or?
If both the mover and
A seconder agree to it?
It's just a minor change to recommend for approval.
Okay, thank you. I see both of them nodding yes. So resolve that the track changes for the Finance Committee's terms of reference be recommended for approval with the changes noted, basically. Then I will ask all those in favor to please raise their hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Let me put that mic on. Does anybody have any other business or Member Thompson?
Yes, through you, Chair. As much as I didn't like seeing it, I did receive my tax installment letter, but I do want to compliment and congratulate staff on this well done circulation of information and finances. Even the QR codes work perfect. My in-laws wanted to compliment you and my neighbors. They said it was well done. So congratulations to you and your staff.
Through your chair to Angela, actually, I just wanted to say thank you as well. So I had a resident who sent a lengthy email to myself asking some questions. I passed it on to Angela and she was very thorough in her response and I appreciated it. I'm sure the resident did as well. So thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Bradzi, do you have a comment? No. Then item 11 on our agenda is the date of the next Finance Committee meeting, which is scheduled for August 17th at 5 p.m. Just to remind everybody of that, it will be going on the calendar. And then item 12, we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.